He had already planned tomorrow 3 different ways before the sun even went down, and every version ended the same way, not with peace, but with another question, another variable, another what if he couldn't close. And that was the moment it hit him. Not as a thought, but as a weight in his chest. He was not planning his life. He was trying to control what he could not see, and the more he tried, the less stable he felt, because every answer created 2 new uncertainties. Every solution opened another risk, and he kept telling himself this was responsibility, this was wisdom, this was what a careful man does. But if that were true, why did it feel like fear? His name was Darius, and no one would have called him anxious, not openly, because from the outside he looked composed, disciplined, always thinking ahead, always prepared. The kind of man people trusted with decisions, the kind of man who never seemed caught off guard. But what they could not see was the cost of that image, the constant calculation, the quiet tension, the way his mind never stopped running through tomorrow while today was still unfinished. And that night, sitting alone with plans spread out in front of him, he realized something he had avoided for years. He did not trust tomorrow to exist without him managing it. The next morning proved how fragile that belief was, because before he could act on any of his plans, one of them collapsed. A message came early, short, direct. The agreement he had been relying on for weeks was gone, not delayed, not adjusted, gone. And the first reaction hit immediately, faster than thought. Fix it, move, replace it, recover, do something. And he stood up, already halfway into action before he even understood what he was doing, because that is how worry works. It convinces you that movement equals control. He went to the man who had pulled out of the agreement, expecting resistance, preparing arguments in his head as he walked. But when he arrived, there was no negotiation, no discussion, just a simple statement. It's not happening, and nothing he said changed it. Not logic, not urgency, not pressure, and that was the first crack, because for the first time in a long time, he had no move left, no angle, no way to adjust the outcome. And he walked away with something unfamiliar, not anger, not even frustration, but exposure. That should have been enough, but it wasn't. Because when one part of your control breaks, you double down on the rest, and that is exactly what he did. He tightened everything else, reviewed every plan, tried to secure every loose end, but the more he tried, the more things started slipping in smaller ways. A delayed response here, a mistiming there, nothing catastrophic, just enough to keep him off balance. And that is where the real tension began. Not in what was happening, but in what it meant. Because now tomorrow didn't just feel uncertain, it felt unstable. By the second day, the pressure had built into something heavier, because now he wasn't just planning, he was compensating, trying to recover what he had lost. And that is where most people make their worst decisions, not when things are calm, but when they're trying to regain control quickly. And he almost did it. An opportunity appeared, fast, convenient, a way to replace what was lost. And everything in him wanted to take it immediately, to fix the gap, to restore the plan, and he would have without hesitation if something small hadn't stopped him, a single detail that didn't fit, not enough to reject it, but enough to hesitate. He stood there longer than he normally would have, and that pause changed everything, because for the first time, he asked a different question. Not, will this fix tomorrow, but why do I need to fix tomorrow, right now? And that question didn't bring an answer. It brought discomfort, because it exposed something deeper than the situation itself. He wasn't reacting to the loss. He was reacting to the fear of not knowing what comes next. That night, he did something he had never done before. He stopped planning, not because everything was solved, but because nothing was, and he sat there in a silence that felt unnatural, like something was missing, like he was neglecting something important. And that is when the thought came, quiet but clear. What if? The problem isn't tomorrow. What if it's your need to control it? He didn't accept it immediately because it sounded too simple, too disconnected from the reality he was facing. But the next morning proved it wasn't, because nothing had changed externally. The agreement was still gone, the replacement still uncertain, the gaps still there, but internally, something shifted, not in clarity, but in how he responded to the lack of it. Instead of rushing, he waited, not passively, not out of indecision, but deliberately, and that decision created something new, space, and in that space, something became visible that had always been there, the pattern. How every time uncertainty appeared, he accelerated. How every time something slipped, he tried to secure the rest. How every decision was driven not by alignment, but by the need to eliminate unknowns. And that realization didn't solve anything about tomorrow, but it changed everything about today. Later that day, he passed an old man sitting near the road, someone he had seen before but never spoken to, and for some reason, he stopped. Not because he needed advice, but because something in him recognized the stillness in the man's presence, the absence of urgency, and without thinking too much about it, he said, "Everything I planned is falling apart." And the old man looked at him, not surprised, not concerned, just attentive, and asked one question, "And what are you doing now?" And Darius answered the only way he knew how, trying to fix it. And the man nodded slightly, then said, "That's why you're losing it." That line landed harder than anything that had happened in the last 2 days, because it didn't attack the situation, it exposed the response. And before Darius could argue, the man added, "You are not managing tomorrow, you are fighting it, and you will always lose that fight." And for a moment, everything in Darius wanted to reject that. Because if he wasn't supposed to control tomorrow, then what was he supposed to do? Just wait, just do nothing, just let things happen. That sounded like weakness, like irresponsibility, like giving up. But the man didn't explain further, he just said, "Come back tomorrow," and that was it. No instruction, no answer, just a gap. And that gap did something unexpected. It forced Darius to sit with a question he couldn't solve immediately, and that question followed him the rest of the day. Not as pressure, but as tension. What if I've been doing the exact thing that keeps breaking everything? That night, the urge to plan came back stronger than before, almost aggressive, as if his mind was trying to reassert control, to rebuild the system that had always worked for him. And this time, the decision was not easy. It felt wrong to not act, wrong to leave things uncertain, wrong to not prepare. And that is the real conflict, not between action and inaction, but between control and trust. He didn't resolve it perfectly, he didn't suddenly become calm, but he made one decision that broke the pattern just enough. He didn't plan tomorrow, and that single decision felt like stepping into something unknown, not externally, but internally. Because now he had nothing to hide behind, no structure to rely on, no illusion of control. Just uncertainty. The next morning, he returned to the old man, not because he had answers, but because he had questions he couldn't ignore. And before he could speak, the man said, "You look like you didn't sleep." And Darius almost laughed, because that was obvious. And then the man asked, "What did you do last night?" And Darius hesitated, then said, "Nothing." And the man nodded, "That's the first thing you've done right." That answer didn't feel right, because doing nothing had always felt like failure, like neglect, like risk. And the man seemed to understand that without Darius saying it. "You think worry is preparation," he said, "but worry is what replaces trust when you don't know how to wait." And that line stayed, because it wasn't abstract. It described exactly what Darius had been doing, replacing something he didn't have with something that felt like control. "If I don't plan, things fall apart," Darius said, and the man looked at him, steady. "Things are already falling apart," he replied, "and your planning didn't stop it." And that was the second crack, because it removed the illusion that his control had ever guaranteed anything. It had just made him feel like it did. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Darius asked, and this time the man didn't answer immediately. He let the question sit, not because he didn't know, but because the answer required something Darius wasn't used to. "Space. Handle today," he said finally. completely without dragging tomorrow into it. And that sounded simple, too simple, but that was exactly why it was difficult. That day became the first real test, not of his plans, but of his focus, because every time his mind tried to move ahead, he had to pull it back. Every time he tried to predict outcomes, he had to stop himself. And that was harder than anything he had done before, because it went against everything he believed made him effective. At one point, he almost broke it completely when another issue appeared. Smaller than the first, but enough to trigger the same reaction. Fix it now, secure it, don't let it expand. And he moved, almost automatically, until he caught himself mid-action, and that moment mattered, because now he could see the pattern forming in real time, not after it happened. He stepped back, not because he was sure it was right, but because he knew the old way wasn't working, and for the first time, he allowed something to remain unresolved, and nothing collapsed, nothing escalated, nothing demanded immediate control, it just stayed. And that experience contradicted everything he believed about urgency. If you've ever felt that pressure, like everything depends on what you do next, like if you don't act now, something will fall apart, pause for a second and look at it differently, because that pressure might not be responsibility, it might be fear trying to move faster than truth. And if that hits, you already know why. This matters, so don't just listen, lock it in. And if you're still here, you're not just watching, you're tracking something real. So stay with it, because what happens next is where most people go back to the same cycle without realizing it. That night, something shifted again. Not dramatically, but enough to change the direction, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't trying to solve tomorrow before it arrived, and that didn't fix his situation, but it removed the pressure that had been distorting every decision he made. The following days didn't bring immediate clarity, but they brought something else, consistency, not in outcomes, but in his response. And that consistency began to stabilize things in a way his planning never had. Because now he wasn't reacting to every change, he was responding to what was actually in front of him. Then something unexpected happened. The opportunity he had almost taken earlier came back, slightly different, clearer, without the same pressure. And this time, he could see it without urgency, without the need to secure it immediately, and that allowed him to evaluate it differently, not as a solution to his fear, but as a real decision. He said no, and that decision would have been impossible a few days earlier, because before, he needed something to fill the gap. Now he didn't, and that changed everything, because now his decisions were not driven by what he was missing, but by what actually aligned. That was the turning point, not when something appeared, when he could choose without pressure. And that is where the teaching becomes real, not as an idea, but as a way of moving through life. Because the moment you stop trying to control tomorrow, you stop making decisions out of fear of losing it. That is what Jesus meant when he said not to worry about tomorrow, not as a passive statement, but as a correction of how you engage with time itself. Because tomorrow is not something you can manage. It is something you step into, and if you try to control it before you arrive, you distort today. Darius saw it clearly now, not in theory, but in practice. Every time he tried to control what hadn't happened yet, he created instability in what was already happening. And once he stopped doing that, things didn't suddenly become perfect, but they stopped collapsing. And that is the shift most people never make. They try to fix tomorrow instead of stabilizing today. If that connects, don't ignore it, because this is exactly where people either change how they move or go back to the same pattern. And if you want more of this kind of breakdown, not surface, but real structure, you already know what to do. Keep tracking this, stay close to it, because this is not about motivation. This is about correction. The next time uncertainty hits, and it will, watch your first reaction, because that reaction is the pattern, and if you can interrupt it, even for a moment, you change everything that follows, not instantly, but directionally. That is the real guide, not controlling tomorrow, but not letting tomorrow control you before it exists. The next morning did not reward him for that decision. Nothing suddenly aligned. No message arrived to confirm he had done the right thing. No clarity appeared to replace the uncertainty he had stepped into, and that was the part he was not prepared for, because he had assumed that if he stopped worrying, something would immediately improve, but instead, everything stayed unresolved, and that is where most people break. Not because the situation gets worse, but because it does not get better when they expect it to. He woke up with the same questions still there, the same gaps in his plans, the same lack of answers, and for a moment, the old pattern came back stronger than before, almost aggressive, telling him he had made a mistake, that he should have taken the opportunity, that he should go back, fix it, secure something before. It was too late, and that voice felt convincing because it was familiar. It sounded like logic, like responsibility, like correction, but underneath it, the same driver was there, fear of not knowing. He got up, already halfway into reversing his decision, replaying the conversation in his head, thinking of what he could say to reopen it, and that was the moment that mattered. Not because of the decision itself, but because he saw the pattern, forming again in real time, the urgency, the need to repair, the assumption that if he didn't act now, he would lose something important. He stopped, not easily, not cleanly, but enough. He didn't move forward, he didn't go back, he just held the moment. And that moment felt wrong, unproductive, risky, like he was letting something slip. But that feeling was the exact signal he needed. Because for the first time, he could see the difference between what felt urgent and what was actually necessary. And those two things were not the same. Instead of chasing the decision he almost reversed, he went back to the only instruction he had been given. Handle today, completely, without dragging tomorrow into it. And that sounded simple until he tried to do it again, because his mind kept moving ahead, trying to solve what hadn't happened yet, trying to predict outcomes, trying to create certainty before it existed. That is what worry actually is, not thinking. Time, traveling without control. And once you see it that way, you realize how much of your energy is being spent on things that are not real yet. By midday, something small happened, something that normally would have triggered him immediately, a message that didn't come when it should have, a response delayed just long enough to create doubt. And before, that would have been enough to pull him back into reaction, to make him follow up, push, clarify, secure the situation. He felt it, the same pull, the same need to act. But this time, he didn't. Not because he was sure it was right, because he was testing something. What happens if I don't react? That question alone changed the entire moment, because now he wasn't trying to fix the situation. He was observing his relationship to it. Minutes passed, then more. Nothing escalated, nothing broke, nothing required his intervention. And that contradicted everything he believed. Because if things didn't collapse when he didn't act, then maybe they never needed his control in the first place. That realization hit deeper than any advice could have, because it wasn't theory, it was experience. And experience is what actually rewires behavior. Later that day, he ran into the old man again, almost by accident, and before Darius could speak, the man looked at him and said, "You almost went back, didn't you?" And Darius didn't answer immediately, because the truth was obvious. And then he nodded. "That's the part no one sees," the man continued. "Not the decision you make, but the one you almost make." And that landed, because it exposed something critical. Change is not proven by what you say, it is proven by what you interrupt. "I thought it would feel clearer," Darius said. "Easier." And the man shook his head slightly. "Clarity doesn't remove uncertainty," he replied. "It removes your need to control it." That line stayed, because it shifted the expectation completely. He had been waiting for certainty, but what he was actually being given was the ability to move without it. And that is a different kind of strength. The next test came harder, not a delayed message, an actual problem, something that needed a decision, something that could not be ignored, something that had consequences if handled wrong. And this time, the pressure felt justified. This wasn't imaginary, this mattered. He had to act, but the difference was how he acted. Before, he would have rushed to close every variable, to predict every outcome, to secure the result before making the move. Now, he did something different. He focused on what was actually in front of him, not the possible outcomes, not the risks of tomorrow, just the decision he needed to make with the information he had. And that simplified everything, not because it removed the risk, because it removed the noise. He made the decision, not perfectly, not with full certainty, but without trying to control what he could not know. And for the first time, that felt stable, not safe. Stable. There is a difference. Safety depends on outcomes. Stability depends on structure, and his structure was changing. That is what Jesus was actually pointing to, not a life without problems, a way of moving through them without being controlled by what hasn't happened yet. That is the guide, not passive, not detached. Precise, present. And if you're noticing something shift even slightly while listening to this, don't ignore it, because most people hear this, agree with it, and then go back to the same pattern the next time pressure hits. So catch it now. Next time your mind jumps ahead, the next time you feel that urgency to fix something before it breaks, stop for a second and ask one question: is this real, or is this tomorrow pulling me out of today? That question alone can break the cycle, but only if you actually use it. And if you've made it this far, you're not just listening casually, you're tracking something that can actually change how you move. So don't lose it here, lock it in and stay with it. Because what comes next is where most people either stabilize this or lose it completely. By the third day, the pattern didn't disappear, it adapted. That's what makes it dangerous. It stopped sounding like panic and started sounding like strategy. You're being careless, you're missing opportunities. This is exactly how people fall behind. It was cleaner now, more convincing, almost calm, and that's the version most people trust, because it doesn't feel like fear anymore. It feels like intelligence. Darius felt it settle in his chest like a quiet command. Fix something today, or you're losing ground. And for a moment, he believed it. A messenger arrived just after midday with a problem that couldn't be ignored. A shipment had been misrouted, not delayed, misrouted. If he didn't act, it would cost him money, reputation, and the trust of people who had already started watching him more closely since the earlier collapse. This wasn't imagined pressure, this was real, and now the equation changed. If he moved fast, he might recover it. If he waited, he might lose more. That's a real choice. That's where most people revert. He grabbed his coat and started walking, already building the plan: who to call, what to say, how to push it back into place. Halfway down the street, he slowed. Not because he didn't care, because he recognized the speed, the same speed that had driven every bad decision before. He kept walking, but he stopped building the future in his head. No projections, no outcomes, just the next right step. Find the carrier, get the facts, decide from there. At the depot, the man behind the counter barely looked up. "We can't trace it yet," he said. "Systems behind." Darius felt the spike, push harder, escalate, threaten, force movement. That's how you get results, right? That's what he had always done. He leaned in, ready to press, and then didn't. He asked one clean question instead. "What can you confirm right now?" The man paused, then checked again. A small detail surfaced, a location ping that hadn't synced. Not enough to solve it, enough to guide the next step. That's the difference. Pressure says, control everything now. Clarity says, act on what is real. He followed the lead, not the fear. It took longer, it felt slower, it didn't give him certainty, but it kept him out of distortion. 2 hours later, they found it, not where he expected, not in time for his original plan, but not lost either. Partial recovery, not perfect, not clean, but intact enough to move forward without damage spreading. And that's when it hit him harder than any lesson so far. The old version of him would have made this worse. Not because he didn't care, because he would have overcorrected, pushed the wrong lever, forced the wrong fix, created new problems trying to solve the first one. That realization stung, because it meant his strength had been a liability. He left the depot with something more valuable than a fixed shipment. He left with evidence. Evidence that not reacting didn't mean doing nothing. It meant doing the right thing without dragging tomorrow into it. On the way back, he saw the old man again. This time, Darius didn't wait. "It didn't fall apart," he said, "but it didn't go how I wanted either." The old man nodded. "Good," he said. "Now you're finally dealing with reality, not preference." Darius frowned. "I could have forced it faster." "You could have forced it wrong," the man replied. "Speed is only useful when you're aligned. Otherwise, it just gets you lost quicker." That landed, because it reframed everything he used to value. Speed, control, anticipation. All of it only works if your direction is right. If not, it amplifies the error. "And what about tomorrow?" Darius asked. "It's still uncertain." The old man looked at him. "It was always uncertain. You just used to pretend it wasn't." There it was again, the crack in the illusion. That night, the urge came back in a new form. Not to fix something broken, but to optimize something that wasn't. He opened his plans again, not from panic this time, but from the desire to improve, tighten, refine, get ahead. And that's where most people slip, because not all worry feels negative. Some of it feels like excellence. He caught it mid-pattern. The same question surfaced again. Is this today, or is this tomorrow pulling me forward? He closed the plans, not because planning is wrong, but because the driver was. He could feel it, the subtle tension, the need to secure an outcome that hadn't arrived yet. He chose stillness again, not passivity, restraint. If you're tracking this, don't miss that distinction. Most people swing between over-control and avoidance. This is neither. This is controlled presence, acting fully in what is real, refusing to be dragged by what isn't. The next morning brought a different kind of test. Not pressure, not loss. Silence. No problems, no urgency, no obvious next move. And that silence felt louder than anything before, because now there was nothing to react to, and without reaction, who are you? That's where worry usually fills the gap. He almost reached for it, almost created a problem to solve just to feel movement. That's how deep the pattern goes. You don't just react to problems, you start manufacturing them to avoid stillness. He didn't. He stayed, worked what was in front of him, finished what was unfinished, spoke when needed, didn't when it wasn't. Simple, clean, unimpressive, and stable. By midday, something subtle but undeniable had shifted. Not outside, inside. The pressure to predict had weakened. The need to secure had loosened. He wasn't calm because everything was solved. He was steady because he stopped trying to solve what wasn't here. That's the line Jesus draws. Not do nothing. Not ignore tomorrow. But don't let tomorrow own you before it exists. If that's landing, don't just nod and move on. Say it. Drop a "I'm done reacting" in the comments, or whatever version is true for you, not for engagement, for commitment. Because this only works if you actually apply it under pressure. By the time evening came, the original gap, the one that started all of this, still wasn't fully resolved. But it wasn't controlling him anymore either. And that's the turning point most people never reach. They wait for the situation to change to feel stable. It's the opposite. You become stable, and then the situation stops dictating your movement. He looked at his plans one more time that night, not to control tomorrow, but to see today clearly. What's real? What's done? What actually needs attention? Nothing extra. Nothing projected. Then he closed them. Not because tomorrow didn't matter, because it didn't belong to him yet. And for the first time, that didn't feel like risk. It felt like alignment. The fourth day is where most people lose everything they just built. Not because something breaks, but because nothing does. No crisis, no urgency, no obvious next move. Just space. And space is where the mind starts to drift back into control without even noticing. That is the most dangerous phase, because now it doesn't feel like fear anymore. It feels like discipline, It feels like getting ahead. It feels like getting ahead. It feels like being responsible again. Darius felt it the moment he woke up. Not panic, precision. Today, you should optimize everything. Tighten the system. Get ahead before something goes wrong again. It sounded clean. It sounded right. And that's why it almost worked. He opened his plans again. This time slower, more intentional, but the same pattern was forming underneath. He wasn't reacting to a problem. He was trying to prevent one that didn't exist yet. That's still control, just refined. And refined control is harder to detect because it hides inside discipline. He started rewriting the schedule, adjusting timelines, solving issues that hadn't appeared. It felt productive. It felt like he was finally on top of things. And that's when it broke. Not externally, internally. The tension returned. Small at first, then sharper. That same tightness in his chest he had felt days ago. The same pressure to get everything right now so tomorrow wouldn't surprise him. That was the signal, not the plan. The pressure behind it. He stopped mid-sentence, looked at what he was doing, and asked the only question that mattered now. Is this today, or is this tomorrow again? He didn't like the answer. He closed the plan. That felt wrong, incomplete, like he was missing something important. That's the trap, because letting go of control always feels like you're losing advantage. But what you're actually losing is tension you've normalized. He stepped outside instead, not to escape, to reset his position. The old man was there again, almost as if nothing else in the world moved as consistently as he did. Darius didn't speak this time. He just stood there for a moment. "You opened it again," the man said. Darius exhaled. It didn't feel like worry. "It rarely does at that stage," the man replied. "That's how it keeps coming back." Darius looked at him. "So what? I just stopped planning altogether?" "No," the man said calmly. "You stop planning to control outcomes. You plan to act clearly when they arrive." That difference landed because it exposed something precise. Planning itself wasn't the problem. The reason behind it was, you don't need a future you can control. The man continued, you need a present you can handle. Darius didn't answer, because that removed the last excuse. If he could handle what was in front of him, then everything else he was doing was just an attempt to eliminate uncertainty. "And if I don't?" he asked. "If I just handle today and tomorrow collapses?" The man looked at him without hesitation. "Then it was always going to collapse. You just delayed seeing it." That was the hardest truth so far, because it meant his control had never prevented anything. It had just postponed reality. They stood in silence for a moment, and then the man added something that cut even deeper. "You don't trust God with tomorrow. You trust your ability to predict it." No explanation followed. None was needed. That sentence didn't create pressure. It removed the illusion. Darius walked back differently, not lighter, clearer. There's a difference. Lightness comes from relief. Clarity comes from exposure. The test didn't wait. By afternoon, a second issue hit, not connected to the first. A separate problem entirely. A client pushing for an answer he didn't have yet. A decision that needed to be made fast, or it would cost him more. This wasn't theoretical. This was exactly the kind of moment that used to justify everything. Pressure, time, risk, move now. He felt the surge. He almost went straight into the old mode. Secure it, answer something, create certainty. But he stopped himself again. Not fully, just enough. What do I actually know right now? He forced himself to answer only that. Not assumptions, not projections, facts. It narrowed everything instantly. He didn't have the full picture, so he didn't pretend to. He told the client exactly what was real, not what they wanted to hear, not what would buy him time, just what was true now. That felt risky, exposed, like he was giving up control of the outcome. But something unexpected happened. The pressure dropped, not because the situation resolved, because he removed the distortion. The client didn't walk away. They didn't collapse the deal. They adjusted. And that changed something fundamental in Darius's understanding. Control wasn't what held things together. Clarity was, and clarity only exists in the present. Everything else is constructed. That evening, he sat down again. Same table, same plans, but a different posture. He didn't try to solve tomorrow. He reviewed today. What actually moved, what didn't, what required action, what didn't. No extras, no projections, just what was real. And for the first time, that felt sufficient. Not because everything was solved, because nothing was being forced. If you're still here, pay attention to what just happened, because this is where most people miss it. They think, don't worry about tomorrow means detach, relax, do less. That's not what's happening here. He's doing less of the wrong thing, not less overall. That's the difference. If that clicks, don't just keep listening like it's content. Hit the like, subscribe if you're tracking this kind of thinking, and more importantly, catch yourself the next time you start solving something that isn't real yet, because that's where the pattern starts. And if you break it there, everything else changes. By the time night settled, nothing miraculous had happened, no sudden breakthrough, no perfect resolution, but something far more important had stabilized. He wasn't being pulled by tomorrow anymore. And that's the moment the teaching becomes real. Not when life gets easier, when you stop letting what hasn't happened control what you do next. On the fifth day, something finally broke, but not the way he expected. It wasn't a plan collapsing or a deal falling through. It was the moment he realized he had been measuring progress the wrong way this entire time. Because for 4 days, nothing big had changed. The original problem wasn't fully solved. The outcomes were still open. From the outside, it looked like delay, and that's exactly where most people snap when effort doesn't produce visible results fast enough. That's when they go back to control. Darius woke up with that exact pressure. You've done enough waiting, now move. It sounded decisive, strong, like taking responsibility again, and he almost listened. He reached for his plans, ready to rebuild the system, to get ahead, to finally push something into place. Then something else happened. He paused, not because he was calm, but because he recognized the pattern. The same surge, the same need to create movement just to feel like he was progressing. And for the first time, he asked a different question. If I act right now, what am I actually trying to fix? The answer wasn't the situation. It was the feeling. That stopped him, because it exposed something he hadn't fully seen yet. Most of his action had nothing to do with reality. It was a response to internal pressure, a way to reduce uncertainty, not solve the actual problem. That realization hit harder than any loss, because it meant he had been building his life around reactions, not direction. He didn't open the plans. He stayed. That felt like losing time, like falling behind, like watching opportunity pass while doing nothing. And that's exactly the illusion worry creates. It convinces you that if you're not moving ahead, you're losing ground. But what if that's not true? What if the ground you keep trying to gain doesn't exist yet? By midday, the test came sharper than before. The original issue, the one that started everything, returned, not resolved. Worse, a piece of it had actually slipped further out of reach. A deadline shifted. A cost increased, the kind of change that normally would have triggered immediate correction. This was the moment. Fix it now or pay later. That's a real stake. That's where people justify breaking everything they just learned. Darius felt it fully. The pressure wasn't theoretical anymore. This would affect him. Directly, measurably. And the old logic was ready. Act now, secure what you can, don't let it get worse. He almost did. He took a step toward it, then stopped. Not because he was sure, because he knew what would happen if he moved from that place. He would overcorrect, push too hard, distort the situation, trying to regain control. He had done it before, every time, and it always made things worse. So he did something that felt almost irresponsible. He didn't rush. He didn't try to fix the entire problem. He addressed the one part that was actually real in front of him, not the future impact, not the worst-case scenario, just the next clear action. It was smaller than what he wanted to do, slower than what he was used to, but it was precise. He made the call, gave only what was true, did not promise what he could not guarantee, did not try to secure the outcome. Then he stopped. No follow-up, no pressure, no forcing. That felt like risk, real risk. But it was clean. Hours passed. No collapse, no explosion. The situation didn't magically fix itself, but it also didn't spiral. It held. And that's when it clicked fully, not intellectually, viscerally. He had been trying to manage outcomes that were not available yet. And in doing so, he had been creating instability in the only place he actually had control, his actions. That's the reversal. You don't control tomorrow by acting on it today. You control today by not acting on tomorrow. That's the teaching. Simple, but brutal to apply under pressure. He sat down later that evening, not to plan, but to review what actually happened, not the outcomes, his decisions, and for the first time something was consistent, not perfect, not flawless, but aligned. Every decision was made from what was real, not from what he feared, and that consistency created something new, trust, not in tomorrow, in his ability to handle whatever comes. That's the shift most people miss. They want certainty about the future, but what they actually need is stability in themselves. Because if you're stable, you don't need to predict everything. You can respond to anything. That's what Jesus was cutting through. Not the future, your relationship to it. Do not worry about tomorrow is not comfort. It's correction. You're solving the wrong problem. And if you keep solving the wrong problem, you will never feel stable, no matter how much you plan. If this is hitting, don't just agree with it and move on. Say it out loud. I'm done solving tomorrow. Drop it in the comments. Not for engagement, for commitment. Because this only works if you actually interrupt the pattern when it shows up. And it will. Every time something feels uncertain, every time something feels at risk. That's where this either becomes real or stays theory. By the end of the day, nothing was fully resolved. But something far more important was, he no longer needed it to be. And that's the point where control finally breaks. Not when everything works. When you stop needing it to. On the sixth day, the shift didn't announce itself. There was no moment where everything suddenly aligned, no clean signal that said, now you're doing it right. That's what makes this stage easy to miss. Because when the pressure drops, you assume the problem is gone. It isn't. It's just not controlling you the same way anymore. And that's exactly when it tries to come back in a different form. Darius felt it early, not as urgency, as opportunity. A message came in clear, promising exactly the kind of opening he would have chased before all of this started. It looked like recovery. It looked like momentum. It looked like the answer to everything that had been unstable over the last few days. And that's why it was dangerous. Because now the pattern wasn't pushing him from fear. It was pulling him with reward. Take this and everything stabilizes. Move now and you're back on track. It sounded reasonable. It even sounded aligned. And for a moment, he leaned into it. He started mapping it out. How it connects, how it fixes what's been off, how it secures the next few days so nothing slips again. Same pattern, different trigger. He caught it faster this time, not because he was trying harder, because he had seen it enough to recognize the structure. This isn't clarity. This is relief. That distinction saved him, because relief feels like direction when you've been under pressure. But it's not. Relief just removes discomfort. Direction requires alignment. He didn't reject the opportunity, he slowed it down. That's the move. Not yes, not no, slow. He read it again, asked questions instead of assuming answers. Focused on what was actually there, not what it could become. And the more he stayed in that space, the more the picture changed. Not dramatically, subtly. Details that didn't match, expectations that required speed, a structure that depended on him moving fast to make it work. That's the signal. Anything that needs you to rush is borrowing stability from your urgency, and that never lasts. He stepped back, not out of fear, out of clarity, and as soon as he did, the pressure attached to it disappeared, not reduced. Gone. That's how you know If stepping back removes pressure, it wasn't alignment, it was attachment. He didn't take it. That would have been impossible a few days ago. Before, he would have called it taking initiative. Now he saw it for what it was, escaping uncertainty. He walked past it, and nothing collapsed. Nothing punished him for waiting. Nothing slipped away that was actually meant to stay. That's when the final piece locked in. You don't lose what's aligned by not chasing it. You only lose what required chasing to exist. That realization changed how he saw everything that had happened before. The loss, the delays, the pressure. None of it was random. It was filtering, removing what depended on urgency, leaving only what could stand without it. That's what Jesus was cutting through. Not just worry, dependence on control as a way to feel stable. Because as long as you need to control tomorrow to feel okay today, you will never be stable. You'll just be busy. There's a difference. Busy reacts. Stable responds. Busy needs outcomes. Stable can handle whatever shows up. That's the guide. Not theoretical, practical, right here in how you move, in what you chase, in what you slow down. By evening, the situation that started everything still wasn't perfectly resolved, but it was no longer unstable either. It had found its level, not through control, through clarity. And that's when it becomes obvious. The goal was never to fix tomorrow. It was to stop letting tomorrow distort today. Everything else follows that. If you've been tracking this from the beginning, don't lose it here. Because this is where most people relax and slide back into the same pattern the next time pressure or opportunity shows up. Catch it. The moment your mind jumps ahead, the moment you feel that pull to secure something before it exists, that's the point, that's the doorway. And if you interrupt it there, even once, you change the direction of everything that follows. Not instantly, but permanently. That's the difference between hearing this and actually using it. If you're going to use it, say it clearly. I'm done letting tomorrow control me. Not for anyone else, for you. Because once that decision is real, the next time the pressure hits, you won't need a reminder. You'll recognize it, and you'll move differently. That's what this was building all along. Not a perfect future, a stable you. And once that's in place, tomorrow stops being something you need to control. It becomes something you can walk into without fear, without urgency, without losing yourself trying to get there. On the seventh day, nothing pushed him and nothing pulled him, and that is where most people quietly lose everything they just built. Because when there is no pressure, no urgency, no visible threat, the mind goes back to its oldest habit without resistance. It starts reaching forward again, not out of fear this time, but out of habit, out of the need to feel in control of something that hasn't happened yet. And the danger of this stage is that it feels completely justified, completely harmless, almost responsible, like you're just being prepared, just staying sharp, just thinking ahead. Darius felt it the moment he sat down. No crisis, no messages, no disruptions, just a clean day, and that was unfamiliar now, because he had been moving inside tension for so long that the absence of it felt like something was missing, like he should be doing more, like he was falling behind by not acting. And that thought didn't come with urgency, it came with quiet logic. Use this time. Get ahead. Don't waste the calm. He almost followed it, opened his plans again. Not fast, not reactive. Careful, intentional. And that's what made it dangerous. Because now the pattern wasn't loud enough to catch immediately. It blended into discipline. He started outlining the next steps, not because something required it, but because it felt right to be ready. And as he did, something subtle returned. Not pressure, not panic, but tension, slight, almost invisible, but there, in the way his thoughts started reaching beyond what was real, in the way he started shaping outcomes that didn't exist yet. He stopped. Not because it was obvious, because it felt familiar. That same shift, from present to projection, from clarity to control. He leaned back, looked at what he had just started, and asked the same question again. Is this today or is this tomorrow? This time, the answer wasn't clean, because technically it was both. That's the trap. Some actions belong to preparation, some belong to control, and they look almost identical on the surface. So how do you tell the difference? He didn't rush to answer. He stayed with the tension, and that's when it became clear. Preparation doesn't create pressure. Control does. That was the line, and the moment he saw that, the decision made itself. He closed the plan, because the reason was, that is the level most people never reach. They stop reacting to obvious fear, but they don't catch refined control. And that's what keeps the cycle alive. Later that day, something happened that would have gone unnoticed before. A conversation. Simple, casual, but with an undertone he recognized instantly. Expectation. The other person was pushing for a commitment, not aggressively. Subtly, trying to lock something in, trying to move the timeline forward, and the old version of him would have agreed immediately, not because it was right, because it felt like progress, because saying yes removes uncertainty. But now he saw it differently, not as an opportunity, as a moment of choice. If he agreed, he would feel temporary relief. If he slowed it down, he would stay aligned. That's a real decision, not theoretical, not internal, external, with consequences. He didn't answer immediately. He didn't reject it either. He asked for time, simple, clean, no explanation, and that response changed the entire dynamic. The pressure didn't increase, it dissolved, because pressure needs participation to exist, and the moment you stop feeding it, it loses force. That's another piece most people miss. They think pressure comes from outside, but most of it is sustained from inside, by the need to resolve it quickly. He walked away from that conversation with something new, not relief, authority, not over the situation, over his response to it. That's the shift. Not controlling outcomes, controlling how much of yourself you give to them. If this is landing, don't just process it. Lock it in, because this is exactly where people go back. They think they've changed because they handled the big moments, but it's these small ones that define whether it holds. The quiet, yes. The quick commitment, the subtle push forward. That's where the cycle restarts, or breaks completely. By evening, he sat in the same place he had been sitting every night. Same table, same space, but a completely different position inside himself. No urge to fix, no need to predict, no pressure to prepare beyond what was real. Just presence. And that presence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt complete, not because everything was solved, because nothing was being forced. That's what Jesus was pointing to. Not a life without responsibility, a life without unnecessary weight. Do not worry about tomorrow is not telling you to ignore it. It's telling you to stop carrying it before it arrives. Because when you carry tomorrow today, you distort both. You ruin today, and you still don't control tomorrow. That's the trap. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The next time someone tries to pull you into a decision too fast, the next time your mind jumps ahead and starts solving things that aren't real yet, that's the moment. That's where this either lives or dies, not in the big crisis, in the quiet move. So don't miss it. Catch it. And if you're actually applying this, not just listening, you already feel the difference. Say it clearly. I don't move ahead of reality, not as a quote, as a rule. Because once that becomes real, everything changes. Not around you, through you, and that's what makes tomorrow stop being something you have to manage. It becomes something you can meet, cleanly, without pressure, without distortion, exactly as it is. On the 8th day, the question he had been avoiding finally showed up in a form he couldn't ignore, not as a thought, as a moment that forced a decision with no keen outcome. A messenger arrived before noon with an answer to the very first problem, the one that started everything, and it wasn't what he expected. The deal could be restored. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to recover what he had lost. There was a condition. He had to commit now. Lock it in today. No delays. That's the trap at its sharpest, because now it looks like resolution. It feels like reward. It feels like everything is finally coming back into place. And if he moved fast, he could get most of it back. If he waited, he might lose it completely. That's a real risk. That's where everything you built either holds or collapses. Darius didn't answer. Not immediately. He felt the pull stronger than anything before. Not panic, not fear. This was different. This was justification. This is what you've been working toward. Take it and move on. This is the moment. And that's exactly why it was dangerous. Because now the pattern wasn't obvious. It was disguised as success. He asked for the details, listened. No projections, no assumptions, just what was actually being offered. The more he stayed with it, the clearer it became. It would fix part of the loss, but it would reintroduce the same structure that created the instability in the first place. Tight timelines, immediate commitments, pressure to maintain what wasn't stable yet. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't aligned. And that's the hardest thing to walk away from. Not something bad, something that almost works. He stood there longer than the messenger expected. Long enough for the old version of him to push through and say yes. Long enough to feel the weight of what he might lose by saying no. That's the real cost, not comfort, opportunity. He made the decision. He declined. Not aggressively, not defensively, clean. And the moment he said it, something unexpected happened. Not outside, inside. The pressure disappeared completely. No second guessing, no regret, no what if, just clarity. That's how you know. When the decision removes pressure instead of creating more of it. The messenger left. No argument, no persuasion, just gone. And with him, the last piece of the old pattern left too. Because that was the final test. Not fear, not uncertainty, control disguised as resolution. He sat down later that day, and for the first time since everything started, there was nothing pulling him forward. No urgency, no gap he felt responsible to fill, no future he needed to secure. And that silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt stable. That's the shift. Not when everything works out, when you no longer need it to. Because now your decisions are not driven by what you're trying to avoid or recover. They're driven by what is actually right. That's what Jesus was cutting through with a sentence most people reduce to comfort. Do not worry about tomorrow. Not because tomorrow doesn't matter, because worrying about it puts you in a position you were never meant to carry. You don't have access to it. You only have access to what is in front of you. And the moment you step beyond that, you start guessing, forcing, distorting. That's where instability begins. Darius saw it completely now. Every time he had tried to control tomorrow, he created pressure today. Every time he moved from pressure, he made decisions that didn't hold. Every time he slowed down and stayed with what was real, things stabilized. Not perfectly, but consistently. That's the guide, not theory, a way of moving. If you're still here, don't treat this like something you just listened to. This only works if you apply it the next time pressure hits. So, make it clear. Drop it in the comments, or say it out loud if you need to. I only move on what's real, not as motivation, as a rule. Because the next time something tries to pull you ahead, the next time you feel that need to secure what hasn't happened yet, that's the moment. That's where this either becomes real or disappears. By the time the day ended, nothing dramatic had changed outside of him, but everything that mattered had. He wasn't waiting for tomorrow anymore. He wasn't trying to control it. He wasn't afraid of it. He was ready for it. And that's the point most people never reach. Not because it's hidden, because they leave the process too early. They fix something too fast. They say yes too quickly. They rebuild the same pattern under a different name. And then they wonder why everything feels unstable again. But if you stay with it, if you actually let this change how you move, tomorrow stops being something you worry about. It becomes something you walk into, clear, steady, without carrying it before it arrives. That's the guide. And once you live it, you don't go back.